It's that time again, ladies, gentlemen, boys, girls, and everyone in between. The IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car season begins again, as does the Michelin Endurance Cup, and it is therefore time for the Daytona 24 Hours. Like we have done since 2019, in this video we'll be going through some of the notable entrants on this year's grid, as well as some of my predictions. The grid is looking good. It was rather small last year with just 49 cars, but this year we're up to a whopping 61 cars. The grid has already been set by a qualifying race for the 60th running of this prestigious event. So, shall we get into it? Let's start with DPi.
Just as last year, 7 cars make up the field for the top prototype class. We'll start off with our race winners from last year, and the most successful team at the Daytona 24 during the DPi era, having won 4 of the last 5 runnings of the event, Wayne Taylor Racing. The number 10 Acura this year will be driven by Ricky Taylor, Felipe Albuquerque, Alexander Rossi, and Will Stevens, who is replacing Helio Castroneves, who we'll talk about soon enough. Naturally, Wayne Taylor are one of the favourites to win, as both the defending winners of the race and also defending Michelin Endurance Cup winners. Speaking of Helio Castroneves, he joins the Meyer Shank Racing lineup ahead of his first full-time IndyCar season with the team. The number 60 car is the other of the 2 Acuras in the field, and will also be driven by Ollie Jarvis, Tom Blomqvist and Simon Pagenaud, who is also preparing for his first full-time IndyCar season with MSR. For Helio, I'm sure it will be a case of Spider-Man No Way Home without a complimentary Rolex. The rest of the field is made up of Cadillacs. Chip Ganassi Racing have expanded from 1 to 2 cars for their second season running the Cadillac DPi, and once again, both lineups are absolutely stacked. Car number 01 will be driven by Renger van der Zande, Sebastian Bourdais, Scott Dixon and Alex Palou. Car number 02 will be driven by Earl Bamber, Alex Lynn, Marcus Ericsson and Kevin Magnussen. These 2 cars have on their lineups some of the best from the world of motorsport, with drivers with Formula 1, IndyCar and sports car pedigree. Perhaps pedigree is an understatement. Maybe even royalty would be more accurate. Ganassi were definite contenders for the win with the 01 car last year, but their hope of victory was shattered by a tyre problem in the latter stages of the race. They'll be looking for redemption this year. Moving on to car number 5, the Mustang Sampling Cadillac run by JDC Miller Motorsports. This car will be driven by Tristan Vautier, Richard Westbrook, Loic Duval and Ben Keating, all very big names in the world of sports cars. It should also be noted that Ben Keating, once again, is featured on not 1 but 2 lineups, committing to running in both the DPi class and the LMP2 class with PR1 Mathiasen Motorsport. Because committing to 1 Daytona 24 a year isn't enough. Time now for car number 31, the Whelen Engineering Action Express car. Felipe Nasr has left the team in place of Tristan Nunez to join Pipo Derani. They'll be joined at the Rolex 24 by Mike Conway. Now, the number 31 car isn't the only Action Express car. For the second year running, the number 48 Ally Cadillac is back once again to contest the Daytona 24 and the rest of the Endurance Cup events. Of course, spearheaded by 7-time NASCAR Cup Series champion Jimmy Johnson, this lineup is pretty stacked. Mike Rockenfeller, Kamui Kobayashi and Jose Maria Lopez make up the rest of the lineup. Each of these drivers have racing records of equal prestige as the likes of the drivers on the Chip Ganassi lineups.
And that just about does it for DPi. Moving on to LMP2, let's establish right away that the entire field is made up of Oricas, as is the case with most LMP2 fields nowadays. If you follow any sort of LMP2 racing, particularly in the WEC, you'll be sure to recognise a few of the following entrants.
Let's start off with the number 8 Tower Motorsport entry. The Tower lineup is very different to last year. John Ferrano, the team principal, will be joined by ex-Formula 2 driver Louis Delatraz, up-and-coming sports car driver Rui Andrade, and 2021 LMP2 Le Mans winner and World Endurance Champion and heir to the House of Habsburg-Lorraine, Ferdinand Habsburg. Moving on to PR1 Mathiasen Motorsport. This team is one of only 2 2 car teams in the P2 class. That's a lot of 2s. Car number 11 will be driven by Stephen Thomas, longtime sports car ace Harry Tinknell, same goes for Jonathan Bomarito, who is also on the lineup, and US F2000 driver Josh Pearson. Car number 52 will be driven by, as previously mentioned, Ben Keating, Mikkel Jensen, Scott Huffaker, and Nico Lapierre. This, I feel, is probably the stronger of the 2 PR1 lineups, but I wouldn't discount either of them. The other 2-car team is G-Drive. If you watch sports car racing in Europe, then you'll definitely know who these guys are. They'll be running cars 68 and 69. Nice. Car number 68 will be driven by Francois Heroux, Oliver Rasmussen, Ed Jones, and Rene Rast. And car number nice will be driven by John Falb, James Allen, Tiemann van der Helm, and F2 sports car driver Luca Giotto. This will be G-Drive's first ever attempt at the Rolex 24. The Russian team has already conquered Europe, but it'll be interesting to see how G-Drive does at one of the biggest sports car races stateside. Moving on to DragonSpeed. This is a well-established sports car team that actually won the LMP2 class at Daytona in 2019, with car number 18, which was famously being driven by Pastor Maldonado of all people that weekend. Anyway, back then, they brought 2 cars to the race, but for this year's Daytona 24 at least, it's just going to be the 1 car, although I understand that there will eventually be a second DragonSpeed car joining the field for Sebring, but not for Daytona due to the fact that Daytona doesn't count for LMP2 points. Car number 81 will be driven by 2021 IndyCar title contender Pato O'Ward, as well as Eric Lux, IndyCar young gun Colton Herter, and Devlin DiFrancesco. Now for a fan favourite, car number 29, the Racing Team Nederland entry. Guido Bantergaard himself joins usual Nederland suspect Fritz van Aert, as well as Rinus VK and Dylan Murray, both of whom are on their debut with the team. For car number 22, United Autosports are back once again for Daytona. Their lineup consists of James Maguire, Guy Smith, Phil Hansen, and Will Owen. Now for car number 18, the defending champions, Era Motorsport. Their lineup remains unchanged from last year as Paul-Louis Chatin, Ryan DL, Dwight Merriman, and Kyle Tilley look to defend their 2021 race win.
And that concludes LMP2. Now we're moving on to LMP3. We won't be going through every single LMP3 entry, otherwise this video is just going to be too long. So I've picked out some of the notable entrants from this class.
We have 9 cars for LMP3, which is actually a relatively good showing for the class. To keep this video from being too long, I've picked out the 3 cars that I think are really worth watching. We're starting with a big name right off the bat. Andretti Autosport is running car number 36. Andretti first entered the LMP3 class in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship at Mid-Ohio last year, and will now be making their LMP3 Daytona 24-hour debut this year with Jared Andretti, Josh Burden, Rasmus Lind, and Gavi Chavez making up the driver lineup. The number 54 Core Autosport entry is also worth a mention. The dream team of John Bennett and Colin Brown are joined by George Kurtz and Nick Johnson. Finally, we round off with the defending Rolex 24 winners, Riley Motorsport, running car number 74. Gar Robinson, Felipe Fraga, Kay Van Berlo, and Michael Cooper make up the driver lineup.
And those are the LMP3 cars that I think you should be watching out for in this year's Daytona 24 Hours. Now let's move on to one I really want to talk about. GTD Pro.
GTD Pro is the second biggest class in the field with 13 cars, and of course serves as a replacement for the struggling GTLM class. The Daytona 24 is actually the debut race for the new class. However, in a way, GTLM lives on in the GTD Pro class, as Corvette have converted their C8R to GTD spec. The lineup of car number 3 is exactly the same as last year, with Nicky Katzberg, Antonio Garcia, and Jordan Taylor on driving duties. The lineup of the number 4 is almost the same, as Alexander Sims has been swapped out for Michael Sorensen to join Tommy Milner and Nick Tandy. 2022 also sees the debut of the new M4 GT3, which will be run by BMW M team Rahal Lederman Lanigan. This was, of course, the team that ran the BMW M8 program in the United States. Naturally, both cars are driven by a host of BMW regulars. Car number 24 will be driven by Philip Eng, Marco Whitman, Nick Yeloli, and Sheldon van der Linde, while car number 25 will be driven by Connor Di Filippi, John Edwards, Augusto Farfus, and Jesse Kron. One entry that was actually quite a pleasant surprise to see was car number 2. KCMG will be running a factory-backed Porsche with quite a lineup. Lawrence Van Tour, Patrick Pile, Dennis Olsen, and Alexandra Imperatore will make up the lineup. KCMG have historically been a Nissan team, but over the last 2 years they have shifted their focus to Porsche. Now the team makes its Daytona 24-hour debut in GTD Pro. We should also talk about another very interesting Porsche lineup, and that is the number 9 Pfaff Motorsports Porsche with its iconic flannel livery. They've got quite the lineup too. Matt Campbell, Aussie, gotta love it, and Mathieu Jaminet are both Porsche factory drivers, and they are joined by Felipe Nazo, who is of course an XF1 driver and has an excellent sports car track record. If you've seen enough IMSA racing in the last few years, you'll know that Pfaff were once just a normal GTD team. Now, here's another GTD team that's moved up to the Pro Class, one that never fails to win the hearts of the fans. I am of course talking about Heart of Racing, the number 23 Aston Martin Vantage. Now, if you don't know about this team, they're actually a charity team that raises money for the Seattle Children's Hospital. Not only do they drive for a great cause, but they also use an Aston Martin, which I don't think anyone actually hates Aston Martin. This car will be driven by Ross Gunn, Alex Riberas, and Maxime Martin. Heart of Racing also have another car in regular GTD, which we'll talk about later. Another team moving up to the Pro Class is Vassar Sullivan, who have been running the only 2 Lexi on the IMSA field these last few years. Car number 14 will be driven by Jack Hawksworth, Ben Barnaco, and Kyle Kirkwood. The team also has another car in GTD, which we'll get to. A team that I could actually see winning the GTD Pro Class is TR3 Racing, which is the only Lamborghini team in the class. Lamborghini have actually done very well at Daytona in the last few years in GTD, winning 3 times consecutively from 2018 through to 2020. Perhaps TR3 can continue the Italian marque's success in GTD Pro. Car number 63 will be driven by Marco Mappelli, Andrea Caldarelli, Mirko Bortolotti, and Rov Inichin. Now I think we should round off GTD Pro with the little Ferrari team that could, Risi Competizione. The now Pennzoil sponsored team is still alive and kicking, and comes to this year's Daytona 24 with a host of Ferrari regulars. Car number 62 will be driven by Alessandro Pierre Guidi, James Collado, Daniel Serra, and Davide Rigon.
And that is it for GTD Pro. It's time now to move on to its sister class, GTD.
I start by giving a quick mention to the teams I mentioned in GTD Pro that also have a car running in GTD. As mentioned, Heart of Racing is running another car in GTD, which is car number 27. That will be driven by Roman DeAngelis, Ian James, Darren Turner, and Tom Gamble. Vassar Sullivan is also running a second Lexus in GTD, number 12, which will be driven by Frankie Montecalvo, Aaron Tielitz, Richard Highstand, and Townsend Bell. TR3 also have a second car number 19, which will be driven by Bill Sweedler, John McGrew, Giacomo Altoe, and Jeff Siegel. Now, moving on with the rest of the GTD field, the biggest class on the grid. AF Corsa, one of the most prominent Ferrari GT teams, are technically running 2 cars, one of which is under the Cetilar Racing banner. Car number 21, the AF Corsa car, will be driven by Simon Mann, Louis Perez Companc, Nicholas Nielsen, and, as I said in my WEC preview, the man who could be a relative of Kimi Räikkönen, Tony Vilander. The Cetilar car, which is car number 47, will be driven by an all-Italian driver lineup consisting of Antonio Fuoco, Roberto Lacorte, Alessio Rivera, and Giorgino Sergnagiotto. AF Corsa aren't the only GTE team racing in GTD. Northwest AMR are also coming to the show, with car number 98 making an appearance. Some Aston Martin regulars behind the wheel with Paul Dell'Alana, David Pittard, Charlie Eastwood and Nicky T. Given that this is the first race for the BMW M4 GT3, we should probably mention one of the more prominent BMW teams, starting off with the number 96 Turner Motorsport car. Bill Auberlen, the winningest driver in IMSA history, is joined by Robbie Foley, Jens Klingman and Michael Deenan. Now for the defending race winners, the number 57 Mercedes of Winwood Racing. Their lineup is a little different to last year. Russell Ward and Philip Ellis are still on the lineup, but Mauro Engel and Indy DeHonte have been swapped out for Mikael Grainer and Luca Auer. Grainer has actually moved over from the runners-up from last year, Sun Energy 1, also using a Mercedes. Car number 75 will be driven by a host of Mercedes regulars, with the lineup for this year's race consisting of Kenny Habul, Lucas Stolz, Raffaele Marciello and Fabian Schiller. Another interesting talking point is the McLaren 720 will actually be making its Daytona 24-hour debut. Two cars from two different teams will be contesting this year's race. The number 59 Crucial Motorsports McLaren will be driven by Lance Bergstein, Patrick Gallagher, Paul Holton and John Miller. Then the number 70 Inception Racing McLaren will be driven by Brendan Uribe, Frederick Schandorf, Ollie Milroy and Jordan Pepper. Surprisingly, you will notice that Paul Miller Racing is missing from this year's grid, who are perhaps one of the top GTD teams, but due to their switch to BMW this year, their new M4 GT3 isn't ready yet, so they'll be joining the field for Sebring.
We could go on all day about the notable entrants in GTD, as there are just so many to talk about. However, those are just a few of the notable ones that I think are worth mentioning. Now for the predictions. For DPi, while it will be the number 10 Wayne Taylor Racing Acura that will be starting on pole, I think the winner of this race will be the number 01 Chip Ganassi Racing Cadillac. This is more based on a gut feeling more than anything else, but last year they just had incredible pace and they were contenders for last year's race win. And their driver lineup is also utterly incredible, as we mentioned earlier in the preview. Hence, they're my pick for this year's race winners. For LMP2, I also have a good feeling about the number 52 PR1 Mathiasen car, or either one of the G-Drive cars. I think they're both great teams and they have some great drivers on all three of these cars. Now, obviously, PR1 do have another car, but I just think that the 52 lineup is a little bit stronger. Actually, the 52 car is the pole sitter in LMP2, while the number 68 G-Drive car sits in third. In LMP3, I think it's going to be the number 36 Andretti car that will take the victory, simply because it's Andretti Autosport. They're a fantastic team in pretty much every series. Everything they touch virtually turns to gold, and their pole position for this year's race kind of solidifies that claim and backs up that stance. In GTD Pro, I know this sounds incredibly lazy because I've made similar predictions for some of the other classes, but I think TR3, which is the number 63 Lamborghini, could convert their pole position into a race win. The reason I say this is not just because they're the pole sitters, but because Lamborghini has done really well at Daytona in the last few years, and I could see them winning again. Finally, in regular GTD, I think it's either going to be the number 59 Crucial Motorsport McLaren or the number 75 Sun Energy 1 Mercedes. Crucial Motorsport have already hit the ground running on the Daytona debut for the 720, slotting themselves into second in GTD. Despite the fact that they're on the back foot to the defending race winners, Winwood Racing, I feel like the runners-up from last year, Sun Energy 1, might be able to come in clutch and take the win they missed out on last year. But what do you think? Comment below. I do actually read them all, so you may as well say something and I will most likely respond to you. Also, it helps the channel grow, as does liking and subscribing, all of which would be very much appreciated. You know the drills with the socials, and now it's time to go and enjoy this year's running of the Daytona 24 Hours. Until next time, goodbye.